We don't only understand the challenges conceptually, but we live it every day.
For refugees themselves, they know more than the others. To share refugee-led organizations respond quickly also.
We've spoken about why resourcing refugee-led organization matters and the structural barriers exist when systems aren't designed with refugee leadership in mind.
Refugee leaders is to recognize that your lived experience, your community trust, and your leadership are your greatest asset and strengths. Even when funding systems make you feel invisible or unqualified, your work and your knowledge are valid and necessary for the work that you're doing.
Welcome, everyone, to Who Holds the Power? Refugee-led Perspectives on Funding and Participation, APNOR's third podcast episode. I'm your host, Najiba Wazifadost, and we are quite excited that this podcast is to bring refugee leaders from across Asia Pacific region to the table to share their lived experience, their leadership, and hard-won lessons on what meaningful refugee participation actually looks like in practice. This series is actually part of a broader effort to inform discussions around the Global Refugee Forum Progress Review meeting in 2025 and to strengthen accountability and actions as we move towards the GRF, the Global Refugee Forum, in 2027. Today's conversation focuses on one of the most critical and often overlooked questions in the humanitarian system: how resourcing refugee-led organizations shapes power, participation, and decision-making. I'm very excited because I'm joined today by founders and leaders from refugee-led organizations based in Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and New Zealand. And I'll also share reflections from APNOR based in Australia. Together, we'll explore how refugee leadership is not only lived experience, but expertise that should and could shape policy, funding, and systems. To begin, I'd love for each of you to briefly introduce yourself. Tell us your name, where you're joining us from, and the communities that you work with, and one space where you or your organization are influencing decisions, whether at a community, national, or international level. And with that, I'd like to come to you, the Khadija from Japan. Over to you, Khadija.
Hello, everyone. My name is Khadija Harunari. I'm joining you from Japan. I'm the founder of Harmony Sisters Network, a refugee-led and women-led organization working with migrant and refugee women and children, particularly those from Rohingya and other displaced communities. One space where my organization is influencing is at the community and national level in Japan, especially around access to education, leadership opportunities, and the recognition of refugee-led organization. Internationally, I also engage in advocacy spaces such as regional refugee network and global forums where we push for meaningful refugee participation, not symbolic participation. Thank you.
Amazing. Lovely to have you with us, Khadija. And with that, I would like to turn over to Ali Reza. Over to you from Indonesia.
Thank you, Najiba. Hi, everyone. My name is Ali Reza Yawari. I'm joining from Indonesia, where I live as a Hazara refugee from Afghanistan. I'm the founder of Emplaced Youth Initiative, a refugee-led organization that is working to support displaced youth in Indonesia through education, leadership development, and advocacy. The communities I work with are primarily youth refugees and refugee-led organizations, especially those who face barriers to education, participation in society, and meaningful inclusion in decision-making processes. Many young refugees have ideas, skills, and aspirations, but they often lack spaces and access to platforms where their voices can be recognized and valued. One space where our organization has been influencing decisions is at the regional level through our networks, an establishment of connection with civil society organizations, academia, and participation in international conferences and consultation. Through these spaces, we contribute evidence-based information from refugee communities, we share our lived experiences, and we also advocate for policies that is affecting our life. We also contribute to researches and ensure that refugee voices and perspectives are not just consulted in those researches and information, but integrated into decision-making processes. For me, meaningful participation means shifting from refugees being seen not as only beneficiaries, but also being recognized and valued as partners, leaders, and have their own agency.
Amazing. It is a real pleasure to have you with us, Ali Reza. And with that, I would like to come over to you, Naval, from Malaysia.
Hi, good morning from Malaysia. My name is Ibrahim. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Nawal, and I am joining from Malaysia, principal of Al-Noor School, Al-Noor and Little Refugee School. A refugee community school serving students from diverse backgrounds. I work closely with the refugee communities in Malaysia, focusing on providing access to quality education and creating safe, inclusive learning environment. I'm also a member of the Refugee Advisory Board with UNHCR, where I advocate for access to education and legal work opportunities for refugees. Through these roles, I engage at community, national, and international levels to influence policies and decisions that improve the lives of refugee communities.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us, Nawal. And that brings me to our last speaker, Mr. Kodrian from New Zealand. Over to you, Kodrian.
Kia ora, Najiba. Thank you so much for having me in this podcast. It's lovely also to be among the other leaders. So my name is Kodrian Ishai. I'm joining you from New Zealand. I'm the founder and CEO of Voice of Aroha. And our organizations have started to amplify voices of marginalized communities, the refugee communities who settled here in New Zealand. We have found the gap and the problem of who's telling our stories, the narrative that was told about refugees. So that's where we have came build these platforms, and we have people from diverse backgrounds to tell lived experience and contribute in the solutions and topics matter to New Zealand society. Within that, we also have been growing into youth leadership space. So now we are also focusing not just the podcast and media and storytelling, but more into youth development, building leaders for the next generation. I'm excited to be part of this podcast and looking forward to this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kodrian, and thank you, everyone. Once again, it's quite exciting to have you all with us in this podcast. Before we talk about solutions, we need to acknowledge the realities many of us are navigating. The humanitarian and development sector is changing rapidly, but many systems still struggle to recognize refugee leadership as decision making power rather than participation alone. From your perspective today, why is resourcing refugee led organizations so critical right now? And with that, I'd like to come to you, Khadija, first to hear your views. Over to you, Khadija.
Thank you, Najiba, for the most very important question. If I speak from the perspective of Japan, many people think that economically a strong country like Japan is a safe haven for refugees, but in the reality, social inclusion in Japan is very difficult. The biggest challenge is the language barrier. Without language support, refugee cannot study, cannot work, or access to healthcare and public services. This make their daily life very hard. Many refugees come from war and poverty. They lost education and lived through trauma. So adapting to Japan's fast and system-based society is very, very difficult. Japan also has very limited support for refugees. There are very few scholarships for higher education and no strong resettlement program available for the refugees. So that is why refugee-led organizations like ours are very important. We understand these problems from lived experience, but without fund, we cannot work. So resourcing-led, refugee-led organizations is very, very important.
Okay, I'd like to come over to you, Ali Reza, and hear your perspective as to why do you think resourcing and funding refugee-led organizations are so critical right now, considering the humanitarian, challenges that we collectively, but more specifically, refugee-led organizations are actually facing every day. Over to you, Ali Reza.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. Well, from my perspective, resourcing refugee-led organizations is very critical right now at the moment because refugee-led organizations are often the first responders. They are the trusted actors. And we are the one who are working closely and very connected to the community, and we know the realities of our communities. We don't only understand the challenges conceptually, but we live it every day. This allows us to design responses that are relevant, culturally grounded, and responsive to actual needs rather than the assumptions. In many contexts, including Indonesia, where I'm living, refugee led organizations are filling critical gaps in education, mental health support, community coordination, and advocacy. And often with little or no funding, this is happening. Despite this, our work has real impact, but impact alone is not enough to sustain organizations without resources, without funding, or without support. Without all of these, the refugee led organizations are forced to rely on volunteer labor, which is not sustainable. And this can lead to burnout of the organizations and people running the organizations. This can also lead to interruptions in the programs that they are running and loss of momentum. Resourcing refugee-led organizations is not only about funding the activities that they are doing. It's mostly of the recognition of the refugee leadership as legitimate, as essential to creating effective and inclusive systems. One structural barrier we face at the moment is many funding systems are not designed to accommodate refugees' legal and living situation and the institutional realities. For example, refugees in Indonesia cannot formally register organizations or open organizational bank accounts or meet standard compliance requirements expected by donors. This excludes refugee-led organizations and initiatives from directly accessing funding, even when we have the capacity and expertise to implement programs and projects. As a result of this, of course, the refugee-led organizations usually remain dependent on intermediary organizations to make a connection through them, which can limit autonomy and slow down our ability to respond to urgent community needs. To truly support meaningful refugee participation, funding systems must evolve to become more accessible, more flexible, and more trust based. Recognizing refugee led organization is crucial to be as equal partners rather than informal actors or beneficiaries.
Thank you very much, Ali Reza. And maybe I can come over to you, Naval. Would you be able to share your views and perspectives on why do we think funding refugee-led organizations are so critical right now? And maybe name out one structural barrier that you think you're facing or your community is facing when funding systems are actually not designed centering that refugee leadership as a core. Over to you, Naval.
Thank you very much, Najiba, for this important question, which we are all the times, struggling about it. So, in my perspective, resources refugee-led organizations is a critical right now because they are closer to the communities and understanding their real needs. So refugees themselves, they know more than the others. Refugee-led organizations respond quickly also, work with trust, and provide cultural sensitive support. So they know each other. They know all the important things that which is very impact to them or very important to them, to their communities, especially in education, protection, and livelihood. However, they often operate with very limited funding and unstable resources, despite carrying a large share of responsibilities. At the time when global displacement is increasing and humanitarian funding is shrinking, investing directly in refugee-led organization resources, efficiency, sustainability, and real impact. So, according to this increasing displacement, when you go directly to the specific and special needs, it means a lot impact to them. And it also strengthens refugee leaderships who has an ability and intent to do the to work or to do more for refugees, or promotes this dignity and enables communities to move from dependency toward resilient and self reliance, for example. Supporting refugee led organizations is not just about funding projects, it is about empowering communities to shape their own futures. If we come to the structure barriers we're facing when funding systems are not designed with refugee leadership, so this is major structure barriers we face in when we come to fundraising or looking after helping. Most funding systems are not accessible for refugee-led organizations. For example, in Malaysia, the application processes are often complex, highly technical, and require legal registration, where there is no legal registration for refugees. Financial histories and complex structures that may refugee-led groups simply do not have access to, especially in restrictive legal contexts, like, for example, in Malaysia. So, as a result, refugee-led organizations are often excluded from direct funding and forced to operate through intermediaries. For example, we must have third parties that which reduce flexibility. So we cannot work flexibility, delay responses, and limited communities' ownership. This system intentionally reinforces inequality despite refugee-led groups being among the most effective and trusted actors on the ground. To truly support refugee leadership, funding models must become simpler, more flexible, and more inclusive of gross work realities. That is in my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naval, for that. I'm going to turn over to you, Kodrian, and maybe if I can get you to emphasize a little bit around, one of the structural barriers that your organization and your community has actually faced when funding systems haven't really been designed in centering the refugee voices and the refugee leadership in that.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, thank you, Najiba. I think in our perspective will be for the New Zealand and the things we face. I think it will be interesting also to hear your perspective from Australia side to see what you guys feeling the same with other colleagues from across different regions, that how they share it. So for us, for New Zealand and our organization, I think what is the barrier we find sometimes when the funding is not designed with lived experience of refugee, we get the barrier of the cap or how they distribute this funding. For example, I want to bring you when refugees resettle here, they do resettle in different cities, and also if within one city, they do resettle in different regions of the city. So the city we have a three council around here. So when you go apply for the funding, and they will tell you we need like 98% or 100% of the population of this refugee community we are serving need to be from the city, while already we are only 10% or 20% of the population as a whole. So kind of if I live in this city, my brother live in the other city, or my other community member. So kind of get them to understand that we are small number, we are across this region already. And this funding, when it's come to refugee community, you need to be flexible into your demographic, into working with our communities. That's the barriers where we get here, because they only target the system they have, that kind of like whole population. All other organizations they can do that because they are bigger populations. When it's come to us, I think this is some barriers we face with some of the funders. How we tackle these things, we are lucky some that we meet some advisors, some people to talk to them about the issues we face, to raise this awareness. And I think they get it once they sit up, they understand our community, how it works. Because it's not like that magic we've been set up all in one place and then you can straight away target this. And we have other barriers of transport, etc. So I think that was one example. Other than that, if those funding does it is not been designed with the people from refugee background, we miss the story. We miss the story. I bring you quickly, Najib, on this example. For instance, youth. A lot of think youth here is targeted between age like 14 to 17 and this. Something miss our refugee backgrounds. They miss a lot of their life from the camping or the waiting countries. We miss that part of youth. We miss that part of the scholarship target. So if you look at that, we get people here who are really our youth, who are in the 24 or 5, but they miss any opportunities because the youth have been targeted up to 24. The one who's 25, 26, they don't get these opportunities. So we try to get awareness here that we have people who lost many years into waiting process. It is good to open something, get solution that this youth who have that energy, who have that power to give back, to be part of this activity. So to allow this gap to be supported by those kind of funding. So that's we are talking about the necessity of having people from lived experience. Yes, so that's my perspective on this topic, and we'll be keen to see how is in Australia, Najib. Is it similar or a different?
Yes, thank you very much, Kodrian, and for bringing me also into this conversation. So I think as APNOR, we have seen this meaningful refugee participation and resourcing quite inseparable. And obviously, as an organization who have initiated an RLO to RLO funding model named the Refugee Leadership Alliance, we've come across very similar challenges to what Nawal, Khadija, and Ali Reza and yourself have already outlined. I think most of the structural barriers that each and every one of you have mentioned is identical to what we have to what we have faced and what we've been hearing from most of the refugee-led organizations and initiatives that we've been trying to fund across the Asia Pacific region. We couldn't agree more with all of you from Australia, from a regional network here in Asia, that without access to flexible, trusted resources, refugee leaders, work will not be sustainable. Most often, we are expected to participate, but not necessarily to lead those initiatives or be able to decide, for our own priority of needs. Or more importantly, I think, as all of you have mentioned, sustainability still remains as a key challenge when we talk about resourcing refugee-led initiatives and organizations. So, Kodri, to your questions, yes, our challenges are quite similar, and I think our barriers are also coming from the same, hurdle and challenges. And I think this is where the participatory philanthropy and intermediary funding models are coming in, not as a charity, but more as a corrective to systems that have historically excluded many, including your organizations, your refugee-led organizations, and refugees from decision-making processes. So with that, again, I'd like to thank you all for bringing your perspective into this important question. And I'd like us to move to our next question. Building on that, I want to move us from the why to the how. We've spoken about why resourcing refugee-led organization matters and the structural barriers exist when systems aren't designed with refugee leadership in mind. So in practical terms, my question is more around when you've tried to access fundings or other resources as refugee-led organizations and initiatives, what has that experience actually looked like, and what tends to open doors and what tends to shut them very quickly? And maybe I'll open up to anyone from the group who wants to come onto this question.
Let me answer this, Najiba. So I want to answer this from the perspective of Japan. I already mentioned that in Japan, accessing funding as a refugee-led organization is very difficult. Many grant systems prioritize long-established Japanese organizations require native level Japanese proficiency, and assume stable legal and residency status, conditions that many refugee leaders do not have. Sometimes what works is personal trust and local relationships, such as support from individuals, universities, or community foundations. And what does not work are formal application systems that focus more on paperwork than impact, and funding that only supports short-term project without covering core cost like staff time, interpretation, or organizational growth. From my 10 years of experience as a leader, one big lesson I learned that not all support is a real support. Sometimes many large organizations, they come to us and say we will support refugee-led organization, but later they take our ideas, they take the credits, and they run the projects under their authority. So many people, and also many people, they don't want refugees as a leader or as a partner. They just want us to stay as receivers of a support. So because of this, I learned that saying no to this kind of support is also leadership. Refugees have a strong potential to contribute if we are given the right resources. Another important lesson I learned that not to depend fully on others. Learning skills and growing as a leader is necessary to build healthy and balanced partnership. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Let me build on that what Khadija said. So here
Sure,
in
Naval, go
Malaysia,
ahead.
our experience on accessing funding for refugees or RLO to RLO has been challenging, but also full of learning. So we are learning about from our challenge. Even there is a challenge, the refugee all the time they are learning their challenge from their challenge. What tends to work is building strong relationship, trust, and partnership with organizations that truly value community leaders, uh, to flexible donors, like flexible donors who understand refugee needs. So when we found the organization that flexible and understand the refugee needs that and refugee themselves, they build a strong relationship. So this becomes, flexible of working both together. And also provide core and long-term funding make a biggest difference when the organization trusts on the refugee organization and give the fund that long-term funding. This makes a biggest outcomes, or it makes a biggest difference between the refugee themselves. So it keeps the sustainability itself, as they allow us to plan sustained programs and respond quickly to emerging needs. So for this reason, when the both build their trust, it keeps, the system sustainability and the quick respond to our needs, to quick respond to the refugee needs. But what tend not to work are rigged funding systems. When the system is complex, application processing, heavy complaints, requirements, and short-term projects based on funding, this makes short term, that means we get the funding, but we lost the sustainability. So keeping going is very, very important. Additionally, funding that does not cover operational and staff costs limits sustainability also. So when the funding just the organizations they say only you can use this for this and you cannot use for renting. This also make restricted and we cannot flexibly work. Overall, in my experience, access improves when donors prioritize trust, flexibility, and partnership over bureaucracy is very, very important.
Thank you very much, Naval and Khadija. I think what's striking is that many of these experiences are actually echoed across the regions and contexts. It is not an isolated issue. And I'd like to hold that reality alongside examples where funding has been designed differently. So maybe I will turn to you, Ali Reza from Mplace and Kodrian from the Aroha, for which I know that both of your organization RLOs have been involved in APNOR's Refugee Leadership Alliance Pool Fund initiative. And my question to the two of you are, what felt different about accessing a grant such as APNOR's Refugee Leadership Alliance, which is an RLO to RLO pooled funding mechanism? So accessing a grant that was designed and decided by refugee leaders themselves, particularly one that supports core and untied costs? And also, how did that kind of resourcing change what was possible for your refugee led organization? Did it shift your ability to lead differently? Did it shift your ability to plan ahead or respond to your community's priorities in a more meaningful way? Maybe with that, I'd like to turn to you, Ali Reza from Emplace. Would love to hear your view on that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Najiba. Well, speaking of the experience, I have to acknowledge that this is very much rare, and this is the first regional refugee leadership to refugee leaders fund through a refugee RLA Refugee Leadership Alliance pool fund. Um, there has been a lot of good things we have seen through this process of receiving the fund and then implementing the program and going ahead with a lot of communication with and through this fund. But what we felt so much different about accessing this grant, it was that it is designed and it is decided by refugee leaders who know it very well how much to keep this sense of trust and understanding that is embedded in the process. That was very much felt. During the process, there was no need to constantly justify our legitimacy or explain our context from the beginning because they knew it very well, and there was not much of just like very much to receiving other funds through other organizations to explain ourselves from the beginning. The process was also recognized so much of our leadership and so much of our expertise as valid and valuable. Especially what was important was the support for core and anti cost, most funding uh, throughout the connections with other organizations or other networks is very much project based, which means organizations can implement activities but cannot invest in their sustainability. Things like coordination, communication, organizational development, or simply the time needed to lead to manage the initiatives was so much overlooked and neglected through other fundings. But through this funding, core funding was allowed, and that could allow organizations to strengthen their foundations. We could plan long term. We could operate this with the stability and dignity. And that could shift refugee led organizations from surviving to actually building and sustaining with and for meaningful impact.
Yeah, I love this question. The reason it's impacted us a lot. So we appreciate this opportunity and the funding in the two ways, if I can explain. As an organization, the benefit of our people who got from this, it's made our impact 10x. Well, it was came in a crucial time. I'm calling in the context of New Zealand. We faced a huge cut in funding from a government side and all others due to the economic and things going on in New Zealand. So we saw this was really a lifesaver for the organization and the people we were serving. It come just in a great time, so keep us continuing and plus maximize our benefits for the people we serving. This was really huge for us, so we appreciate the other impact we saw. What was good about this? We saw the continued support from the team. So this is something unique because it's RLO, that's just something great because it's led also by you guys who are also from refugee background. So we said that kind of mutual trust between checking in. There was kind every month or 2 months there was a meetings. How you guys doing? Any other support and the opportunity that created after that, which is we I think I met all this many amazing leaders across different organization across the countries in the region. So that also strengthened a little bit understanding what other colleagues are doing in the different countries. The people, the guests, they were coming to those sessions, the learning. I think this have enriched us kind of like development for the leaders themselves. So the fund have uplift not just the goals of the people we served, but also us as organization leaders. And I think this is where the cool that I saw in this funding that created next level of relationship. You put the leaders into with you, taking them in this journey. So that's where we connect to each other. We learned about funding, reporting, all these kind of cool sessions that we've been through. So that was really unique, and I hope you guys been doing it again. That would be great because I know there's many other RLO who need this specific this time that we stay unstable. We need more stable. When our organization are stable, our people are stable. The community who need this is stable. So it's just a great. We had a great experience as a voice of all here. Thank you.
I'd like to shift us now into lessons because what you've all have shared isn't just about individual organizations. These are real values here for funders, partners, and anyone shaping policy or practice. So, looking back on your journey as a refugee leader or as a refugee led organization, what is one key lesson you've learned that others really need to hear, especially when it comes to funding, when it comes to partnership, or when it comes to power dynamics that each and every one of us have experienced? If there is one thing you wish decision makers understood earlier, what would it be? And maybe I can turn to you, Alireza, first.
Sure, thank you, Najiba. Let me touch a little bit on some of the realities, which are very harsh challenges every day we as refugee leaders are dealing and tackling and coping with during our work on the ground. Um, in many situations, refugee led organizations are invited to participate symbolically, but not structurally supported. This is very much visible on the tokenism that's happening. We are asked to contribute our experiences, our networks, our labor, but without being supported and resourced in ways that allow us to sustain and grow our work. Over time, I have learned that true partnership means shifting power. And shifting power is not just sharing platforms, but sharing resources, sharing the table to decide together and to build that trust together. One other important lesson for me as a leader of the refugee led organization is that we do not need to be fixed to fit the traditional system of funding, but instead, funding systems and partnerships can and need to evolve to recognize realities and strengths of refugee leadership. When refugee led organizations and initiatives are trusted and supported directly, we are able to respond faster. We can design more relevant programs. We can create deeper impact within our communities and the people that we are working with.
Thank you, Alireza. Maybe I can come over to you, Naval.
The key lesson I have learned is that relationships matter more than resources. So that was very, very important for our organization because we built a good relation with APNOR, that the communication was very flexible and the resources that they give, they are all the times leading us and teaching us how to use it. So they, they teach us how is the sustainability to use this funding, and the strong partnership are built on trust and transparency and shared values, not just proposal and reports. It was more than that. When partners truly listen, respect refugee needs and leaderships, what they need and what they have to do, and treats us equal. That is make a difference all the time. Impact is deeper and more listening. Another important lesson is the value of persistence itself and credibility. As a refugee organization, we often face a reject and systemic barriers that if we think about it, we say, okay, this is a rejecting and we cannot continue. That make us disappointed. But staying committed to quality, accountability, and community centered work gradually build trust. That was what we felt. Over time, this opened doors to meaningful partnership. Ultimately, when funding system shift from control to collaboration and trust. both refugee leaders and donors achieve great impacts. In my experience, for example, in our refugee learning center, not just funding what we found, as we found also training from APNOR, the core unit, united cause that was especially powerful to allow us to strengthen our organization support, our teachers, our staffs, manager, renting, and utilities also. We've shifted from primary to secondary, which was very, very important for us, our students. We built a primary school from that fund, and we keep thinking for sustainability. It gives us dignity, stability, and space to focus on impact instead of just survival. More than financial support that we found, it felt like recognition of our leadership and trust on our capacity to lead meaningful change. So, beside the fund, there was continuous training how to use this fund. That was different from other organizations because this organization, APNOR organization, is understanding and they know what the refugee needs. That makes a difference.
Thank you, Naval. And Khadija, maybe you could share with us also one key lesson you've learned that you think is quite important for others need to hear as well.
So yeah, one key lessons I have learned is that no one can create systematic change alone. Real change is only possible through strong partnerships, partnerships between refugee-led organizations, partnership between host communities, and partnership between large institutions. For example, the partnership between APNOR and Harmony Sisters Network creates a bridge between grassroots refugee leadership and regional advocacy platform, allowing local community realities to inform policy discussions, strengthen collective voice, and amplify refugee-led solutions across the Asia Pacific region.
Thank you, Khadija, for that. Maybe over to you, Kodrian, again. I think the emphasis would be around the same question. So, if there is one thing you wish decision makers understood earlier when we talk about funding, when it comes to partnership, what would it be?
What I'm positive about in this question, what I learned, I mean, the lesson, we have organizations such as APNOR as advocate for us. This is really good. This is good that as a small organization, we operate in our countries and regions. So we have such a body that bring us together, such a body to advocate for us, to open those relationships directly with the big funders, with the big organizations. So this is really positive and good point that this is the journey we've been learning. And if the funders, decision makers, wish they know about the relationship, I think it's just this to strengthen this kind of ties, because such a bodies bring you those to connect communities who serve in the ground. This is kind of like you making sure the funding's coming from top is coming to the service the people that they need on the ground. So that kind of relationship is great. And what have been cool with this process that APNOR have led us to meet with this as well. We met the funder themselves. We met that kind of session we've been giving, the training, the connection, and other opportunities that I think some of the members have traveled it into different conferences. I think that is really great relationship I saw. That's just really great investments in the leaders of those organizations. And I think this is where I want the funders who make the decision to see like the connection here, to see the impact they're creating in the different levels. When they are funding such a organization body, then they are funding the other organization in the different countries, then we serve in the communities. That's how the huge impact you can see in the river. I keep my answer there, but because my colleagues have covered a lot in their perspective, so we have learned across it. I don't want to repeat, but Najiba, back to you. I think it's great to hear your experience from Australia as well. So if you share, and you as an APNO, you guys have a different perspective as a fund holder, we can say. Share with us. That
Thank
would be
you.
great.
Thank you. Maybe I think one additional insight that I could add to this conversation that's really resonated with us at APNOR is particularly, through the emerging research, including the work led by ODI on refugee-led intermediaries. that is the distinct role that RLO intermediaries can play in bridging the gaps that traditional funding systems, struggle to cross. So I think what this research by ODI has pointed is that RLO intermediaries don't just move resources, they translate systems. And I think I've been hearing some of that echoing in your responses as well. As RLO intermediaries, we try to reduce the risk for donors while increasing access, while increasing relevance and accountability for refugee-led organizations. So through models like our Refugee Leadership Alliance in APNOR, we've seen how intermediary structures can actually absorb compliance burdens. And I think we've heard it through Naval as well, and how it supports governance and learning and still keep decision making, which is the most important part, rooted with the refugee leaders themselves. So what's powerful here isn't that it's about creating another layer. It's about rebalancing the system, and that's what we try to do as APNOR. So intermediaries basically led by refugee networks, whether it's APNOR or, for example, really the much more significant model. They're all here to unlock funding that would otherwise never reach the grassroots, while preserving autonomy and community accountability. So I think taken together with all that you've each and every one of you have shared, the lesson, isn't simply about funding refugees differently. It's really about how funding flows, and who's in the middle can either reproduce exclusion or actively dismantle it. So thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution to this question. As we approach the next phase of the Global Refugee Forum process, these questions of power, resourcing, and accountability becomes even more urgent. So again, commitment to meaningful refugee participation must translate into budgets, partnership models, and shared decision-making, not just statement. As we come to the end of this podcast, I'd like to ask each and every one of you, what advice would you give other refugee-led organizations that are navigating through funding opportunities or partnership or challenges right now? What is one thing funders need to change before GRF 2027 if they are serious about meaningful refugee participation? Maybe I can start with you, Ali Reza, and then go to Khadija and Nawal and back to Kodrian at the end.
Thank you. Thank you, Najiba. Well, my advice, better to say my encouraging message to other refugee-led organizations and refugee leaders, is to recognize that your lived experience, your community trust, and your leadership are your greatest asset and strengths. Even when funding systems make you feel invisible or unqualified, your work and your knowledge are valid and necessary for the work that you're doing. It's important to invest in building your organizational foundations, your relationships, your documentation, and your clarity of vision, because these strengthen your ability to engage with partners and opportunities over time. For funders, one critical change needed before the GRF 2027 is to make funding directly accessible to refugee led organizations, including support for core and untied costs. Meaningful refugee participation cannot exist without meaningful investment in refugee leadership. And this means simplifying compliance requirements, creating flexible funding mechanisms, and trusting refugee led organizations and refugee leaders as capable actors. Um, just to conclude, if funders are serious about meaningful participation, they must move beyond consultation and begin resourcing refugee led organizations as partners and as leaders. Without shifting resources, participation risks remain symbolic rather than transformative.
I also want to share the same message that Ali already shared. So my message should be to the refugee-led organization that believe in your value and protect your ideas, because that's really matter, and also build your leadership skills and build partnerships between the other RLOs and the host communities. And for the organization, for the founders, my advice would be to see the refugees as a partners, not only as receivers only. Trust-based, flexible, long-term funding is very essential. Resourcing refugee-led organization is not charity. It is an investment in dignity, sustainability, and a real contribution.
My advice is to believe in the value of your leadership and lived experience. Build strong community roots. So without community, leadership cannot work. Document your impact. Any impact you have to you have to you have to document because it is very important, the fundamental and the asset of your organization. And invest relationship based on trust and shared values. Do not be discouraged by rejection or complex systems. Persistence, integrity, and accountability will open doors. So keep go and continue trying all the time. Seek partnership that treat your equal partners, not just implementations. So if you just want to implement without trusting, without building relationship, the sustainability, you lost the sustainability. And advocate confidently for flexible and for funding that support your sustainability. That is for our led organization. And the things funders must change before grant 2027. Funders must redesign their funding system to be easily accessibility to refugees-led organizations. This means simplify applications, processes, providing flexibility for funding, trusting community leadership. That's very, very important. They must also build relationship. They must trust to the organization and involving refugees directly in funding decisions. Without this shift, meaningful refugee participation will remain symbolic rather than real.
So my advice from my perspective to the first advice to the refugee-led organizations, it's tell your story. When you tell your story, the work you're doing, it is the one will put you in the advocacy when the relationships start opening. And keep working in your local areas. Try create more partnership. Reach out, participate in activities you've been invited. Get yourself involved into strategic work that your voice can be reached into different platforms. So because you are the expert of your story, you're the expert of your communities, you're the one the funders will need. You are the one that the big agencies who have the goals to help people, you are the one to activate those fund and changing. So keep bringing those into the table in any opportunities in the local, national, and international. Just be there, be part of it. The other advice for the funders or for before the GRF 2027, I think will be great. I think Ali have put it very nicely, the message he sent there. But it would be great if we see that the regions be funded well, because at this stage we don't know how much is funding globally. And if we have specific funding for, let's say, our region here, so we know our competition is between this kind of countries instead of competing in a global, which is our opportunities less and less and less. So it'd be great strategic if we find each region have a certain um, percentage of funding, so then that kind of funding can go back to those countries of need. This you're making sure the equal access to everyone and everyone can have a chance to get benefit from this support so that the communities thrive well and achieve the goals. So I think that would be the thing, and also meaningful participation is very very important, not just as a ticking box, as just bringing some there. It is the real impact, the real people doing work, to bring them, to share those stories, to invest in them, and start supporting the next level. When we say meaningful, it's kind of, I would really advise to think about the relationship into more than one project. This is one project, then how we can make sure this kind of organization leaders and the people get into the next level, the next support we can open the platform. Yeah, I think that's my message there or advice. Hope that helpful. But Mike, to you, Najiba.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Today's conversation just basically reminds us that refugee leadership is not emerging, it is already here. Like we've heard the testimonies from each and every one of you. I think the question for the sector is whether the system will continue to work around refugee leaders or finally be shaped with them. Before we wrap up today's podcast, I'd love to go around and hear just one word from each of you that captures what this conversation has meant to you. And maybe over to you, Ali Reza, then Khadija, and then Kodrian and Naval.
Wow, one word is just very short to say, but I said a word and then one sentence to follow that word. I think more powerful is the word for me on behalf of the refugee-led organization and also other RLOs, is that we are working together collectively, and that is making us more powerful in terms of the power shift and the agency and inclusion that we are working to bring in the system.
I would say solidarity, the word, because it means standing together across differences to share power, responsibility, and commitment in creating lasting system and systematic change.
I think I will use the word hope. Appreciate this conversation. This was something really great. Sharing, challenging, learning, and I hope there's a hope if you continue such a conversation and the support, the change will come after that. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this conversation. So what I want to say is with APNOR grant, we create a learning space that empowers students and strengthens the whole community. So thank you very much and keep on helping the refugees. Thank you.
Thank you for your honesty, for your depth of reflections, and for the work that you do every day, often with limited resources, but with extraordinary commitments from your communities. So, the insights that you have shared today go far beyond this episode. The challenges on how systems are designed, how partnerships are formed, and whose leadership is designed or recognized and supported. At APNOR, we are deeply grateful for your time, for your trust, and for your leadership. And we hope that this conversation contributes in small way but meaningful way to shifting how power and resources have flow across the sector, something that has been resonated across all the speakers. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everything you continue to build. And we'll see you soon in our next episode.